Intern's elevator accident sparks magical love affair with billionaire CEO. Scarlett Elliott had no idea that stepping into an elevator would change her life forever. One wrong move, a moment of pure chaos. And suddenly she found herself in the arms of the most powerful billionaire in New York, Robert Adams. But was it fate or something more? Have you ever had a moment that felt like destiny? A small incident that led to something life-changing? Let me know in the comments. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. And to all our loyal viewers, thank you for being part of this growing community. We spend hours making these videos and hope that they reach a lot of people around the world. One of my goals is to share valuable lessons about love, humility, and kindness so we can have a better world. I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. Let us begin. Scarlett Elliott adjusted the strap of her leather satchel, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor of Adams Industries' towering headquarters. Her first day as an intern had barely begun, and already the weight of expectation pressed against her chest. She was 24, sharp as a blade, with dreams bigger than the skyscraper she now stood in. Her caramel skin glowed under the sleek lighting, but her stomach churned with nerves. This wasn't just a job, it was her shot at something extraordinary. She glanced at her watch. 5 minutes until the department meeting. Clutching a tray of coffees she'd been tasked to fetch, because apparently interns doubled as baristas, she hurried toward the conference room. The hallway buzzed with suits and clipped conversations, the air thick with power and purpose. She weaved through the crowd, her focus narrowing until... "Watch it!" a voice barked. Too late. Her elbow jostled and a cup tipped, splashing dark liquid across the pristine white shirt of a broad-shouldered man with a sneer already forming. He was mid-40s, slicked back hair, the kind of guy who looked like he'd been born in a boardroom. The coffee seeped into his tie and heads turned. "Are you blind?" he snapped, brushing at the stain as if it were acid. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Scarlett's cheeks burned. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean..." "Didn't mean?" He stepped closer, his voice rising, drawing more eyes. "This shirt costs more than your rent, sweetheart. Maybe if you weren't so busy daydreaming, you'd be competent enough to carry coffee." The crowd murmured. A few snickered. Scarlett's apology lodged in her throat, replaced by a flicker of defiance she couldn't quite suppress. She opened her mouth to retort, but he waved her off like a fly. "Get out of my sight," he said, turning away, already dismissing her. Humiliation coiled tight in her gut. She clutched the tray, her knuckles whitening, and bolted toward the elevators. The gleaming doors of one stood open. A sanctuary. She slipped inside, jabbing the close button repeatedly, her breath hitching. Come on," she muttered, willing the doors to seal her off from the world. They began to slide shut until a hand shot through the gap, forcing them apart. Scarlett froze as a man stepped in, tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that filled the space like oxygen rushing into a vacuum. His suit was charcoal, tailored to perfection, and his dark hair was swept back with just enough rebellion to hint at something untamed. His eyes, storm gray and piercing, locked onto hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Robert Adams, the billionaire CEO of Adams Industries. She'd seen his face on magazine covers, but up close he was something else entirely. The doors sealed behind him with a soft thud. Silence stretched between them, electric and heavy. Scarlett shifted, suddenly aware of the coffee tray still trembling in her hands. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words evaporated as the elevator lurched. A sharp jolt rocked the floor beneath them. The lights flickered, plunging them into a strobe of shadow and glare. Metal groaned, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the walls. Then, free fall. Scarlett's stomach flipped as the elevator plummeted, a scream clawing up her throat. It stopped abruptly, slamming them both against the railing with a bone-rattling thud. The lights dimmed, settling into a faint, unsteady glow. Scarlett's breath came in shallow gasps. She gripped the railing, her legs unsteady, the tray of coffee now a shattered mess on the floor. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. We're stuck." Roberts straightened, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve, as if they hadn't just narrowly escaped death. He turned to her, his expression calm, almost infuriatingly so. "Breathe," he said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the chaos in her head. "Look at me. We're going to be fine." She tried, dragging air into her lungs, but her pulse hammered against her ribs. The walls felt too close, the air too thin. She pressed herself against the paneling, her eyes darting to the emergency button glowing red in the corner. "Fine? We just dropped 10 floors. What if it falls again? What if—" "It won't." He stepped closer, his presence a quiet anchor. "The brakes engaged. We're between floors, that's all." "That's all?" Her laugh was sharp, edged with panic. "We're trapped in a metal box, dangling over nothing, and you're acting like it's a lunch break." One corner of his mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Would you prefer I panic with you? Scream and claw at the doors?" She glared at him, but the steadiness in his gaze pulled her back from the brink. She forced a breath, then another, her shoulders loosening just a fraction. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. What now?" "Now," he said, leaning casually against the wall. "We wait." Scarlett slid down to the floor, her back against the cool metal, knees drawn up. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It crackled with something unspoken. She stole a glance at him. He was watching her, not with the cold detachment she'd expected from a man who ran an empire, but with a curiosity that made her skin prickle. "So?" he said after a moment, breaking the tension. "First days don't usually go like this, I assume." She snorted, a dry, self-deprecating sound. "Number. Usually I don't spill coffee on jerks and get trapped in elevators with—" She stopped, realizing who she was talking to. "I mean, with, people." "Jerks, huh?" He raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Who was it?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Some guy in a fancy shirt, acted like I'd ruined his life over a coffee stain." "Sounds like Grayson. He's got a temper and a wardrobe obsession." Roberts's tone was dry, but there was a glint of something else. Disapproval, maybe. "He shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Scarlett blinked, caught off guard by the quiet authority in his words. "It's fine. I'll survive." "Will you?" He tilted his head, studying her. "You don't strike me as someone who runs from a fight." Her lips parted, a retort ready, but the way he looked at her, really looked, made her pause. "I don't," she said finally, her voice softer. "But I pick my battles." "Good." He nodded as if she'd passed some invisible test. "You'll need that here." The air shifted, warming with the weight of their words. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of how close he was, even with the space between them. The elevator felt smaller, the walls pressing in, not with fear now, but with something else. Something alive. "What about you?" she asked, daring to push back. "Do you pick your battles, or do you just win them all?" He chuckled, a low, rich sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't always win, but I don't lose often." "Must be nice," she said, her tone teasing but her eyes searching his. "Being untouchable." His smile faded just for a moment, and something flickered across his face, something raw, unguarded. "No one's untouchable," he said quietly. "Not even me." The words hung there, heavy with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Before she could press further, a faint hum buzzed through the elevator. The lights brightened, then dimmed again. She tensed, her hand gripping the railing. "Relax," he said, his voice steady again. "Maintenance will get us out. Eventually." "Eventually?" She shot him a look. "You're awfully calm for someone who could be stuck here all day." "I've been in worse places," he said, his gaze drifting to the ceiling as if recalling a memory. "And I've had worse company." Her laugh surprised her, breaking the tension. "Gee, thanks. I'll take that as a compliment." "You should." His eyes met hers again, and this time there was no mistaking the spark. It wasn't just the adrenaline of the fall. It was them, here, now. Minutes stretched into an hour. They talked about her internship, her ambitions, the way she'd fought her way into Adams Industries with nothing but grit and a resume. He listened, really listened, his questions sharp and thoughtful. She asked about him too, peeling back layers of the man behind the myth. He dodged some answers, but others slipped through, hints of a childhood that wasn't all private jets and privilege, a drive that mirrored her own. The heat between them grew, subtle but undeniable, a brush of his hand against hers as he shifted, a lingering glance that made her breath catch. The elevator was a pressure cooker, and they were both feeling it. Then a crackle from the speaker above. "Mr. Adams, this is maintenance. We're working on the hydraulics. Should be moving in 20 minutes. Roberts pressed the intercom. "Take your time," he said, his eyes still on Scarlett. "We're managing." She raised an eyebrow. "Managing?" "More than managing," he said, his voice dropping. "I'd say we're doing just fine." Her heart thudded. The space between them shrank, the air thick with possibility. She didn't know if it was the danger, the confinement, or him. But something was pulling her in, and she wasn't sure she wanted to fight it. The elevator hummed again, a faint promise of freedom. But as the minutes ticked by, Scarlett realized she wasn't ready for this, whatever this was, to end. Not yet. And the way Roberts looked at her, like he could see straight through to her core, told her he felt the same. The elevator jolted to life with a groan, the doors grinding open to reveal a cluster of maintenance workers and curious onlookers. Scarlett stumbled out, her legs unsteady from the hour-long ordeal, her pulse still racing, not just from the fall, but from him. She brushed her hair back, forcing herself to focus, to ignore the flutter in her stomach that hadn't stopped since Robert's last words. She didn't dare look back as she hurried down the hall, the echo of his gaze still burning into her. Roberts lingered a moment longer, watching her go. The air felt colder without her in it, the space emptier. He adjusted his cufflinks, a habit when his mind churned, and stepped out into the chaos of flashing tools and murmured apologies from the crew. But his thoughts weren't on the elevator, or the crowd, or the empire he commanded. They were on her, Scarlett Elliott, the intern who'd faced him down with fire in her eyes and a laugh that cut through his walls. He'd met thousands of people, none like her. The day dragged on, but Scarlett couldn't shake the morning. She sat at her desk, a cramped corner in a sea of cubicles, replaying every word, every glance. Her phone buzzed, a message from her supervisor, Linda, a stern woman with a permanent frown. "Conference room, now." Scarlett's stomach dropped. She grabbed her notepad and hurried over, her mind racing. The coffee incident. It had to be. She stepped into the room and there was Linda, arms crossed, flanked by the jerk from earlier. Grayson, Roberts had called him, his shirt still faintly stained. "Explain yourself," Linda said, her voice clipped. "You've been here less than a day and you've already caused a scene." Scarlett straightened, her jaw tightening. "It was an accident. I apologized." "An apology doesn't fix incompetence," Grayson cut in, leaning forward. "She's a liability. I say we cut her loose before she costs us more than a dry cleaning bill." Linda's eyes narrowed. "I'm inclined to agree. "This isn't a playground, Scarlett. We can't afford mistakes." Heat surged up Scarlett's neck. She opened her mouth to argue, to fight, when the door swung open. The room fell silent as Robert Adams stepped in, his presence sucking the air out of the space. His gaze swept over them, cool and unreadable, before settling on Scarlett. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm. Linda faltered, her authority shrinking. "Mr. Adams, we were just addressing an issue with the new intern." "Her," Grayson said, pointing at Scarlett. "She's a walking disaster. Spilled coffee on me, disrupted the day." "She stays," Roberts said, his voice like steel cutting through Grayson's whine. He turned to Linda, his eyes cold. "If there's an issue, bring it to me. Directly." A stunned silence followed. Grayson's mouth opened, then shut. Linda blinked, her composure cracking. Scarlett's heart thudded, her mind reeling. Why was he doing this? For her. Roberts didn't wait for a response. He gave Scarlett a brief, piercing look, something unspoken passing between them, then walked out. The room exhaled, but Scarlett felt like she couldn't breathe. She mumbled a thanks to Linda, who waved her off with a scowl and fled back to her desk, her thoughts a tangle of confusion and adrenaline. That night, she sat cross-legged on her tiny apartment couch, a glass of cheap wine in hand, staring at the city lights beyond her window. Her phone rang, an unknown number flashing. She hesitated, then answered. "Scarlett," came the voice, deep and familiar, sending a jolt through her. "It's Roberts." She nearly dropped the glass. "Mr. Adams, why are you calling me?" A pause, then a faint chuckle. "Roberts, please. And I have a business proposition for you. Dinner, tomorrow, 7 p.m. I'll send a car." Her breath caught. Business. The word felt like a flimsy excuse, and the way he said it, low, deliberate, told her he knew it too. "A proposition," she repeated, testing the waters. "What kind?" "The kind that could change things for you," he said. "I saw something in you today. I don't waste time on people who don't have it." Her pulse quickened. "And what's it?" "Meet me tomorrow and you'll find out." His voice softened, just enough to hint at more. "Say yes, Scarlett." She bit her lip, torn between caution and the pull she'd felt in that elevator. This wasn't just business. It was a door cracking open. To what, she didn't know. But resisting him, that felt impossible. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Yes. Good." She could hear the smile in his tone. "I'll see you then." The call ended, and Scarlett set the phone down, her hands trembling slightly. She stared at it, the weight of his words sinking in. Dinner with Roberts Adams. A proposition. Her mind spun with questions. Why her? What did he want? And why couldn't she shake the feeling that this was about more than a job? Across the city, Roberts stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand, the skyline glittering below. He replayed the day, the elevator, her defiance, the way she'd held her own. He wasn't a man who acted on impulse, but Scarlett had slipped under his skin, a puzzle he needed to solve. The dinner wasn't just a whim. It was a move in a game he hadn't fully mapped out yet, one with stakes he couldn't yet see. Scarlett hung up the phone, her apartment suddenly too quiet, the hum of the city outside a faint pulse against her racing thoughts. Dinner with Roberts Adams. The words looped in her mind, each one heavier than the last. She tossed and turned that night, torn between excitement and a nagging whisper of doubt. What did he see in her? What did he want? By morning, she'd convinced herself it was just business, a chance to prove herself. But deep down, she knew better. The next day dragged, every tick of the clock a slow burn. At 6:45 p.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside her building, the driver holding the door open with a polite nod. Scarlett smoothed her dress, a deep emerald dress she'd splurged on months ago, never worn until now, and slid into the leather seat, her nerves buzzing. The city blurred past, a kaleidoscope of lights and shadows, until they stopped at a rooftop restaurant perched high above the chaos, the kind of place she'd only ever seen in movies. Roberts was waiting, standing by a table near the edge, the skyline sprawling behind him like a crown. He wore a dark blazer, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, a casual edge to his usual polish. His eyes found hers as she approached, and the air shifted, charged with something she couldn't name. "You came?" he said, his voice warm, pulling out a chair for her. "Did you think I wouldn't?" She sat, meeting his gaze with a flicker of defiance. "I hoped you would." He took his seat across from her, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "But I don't assume anything with you." The waiter poured wine, a rich red that glowed in the candlelight, and they fell into conversation. Easy at first about the company, her internship, the absurdity of the elevator fiasco, but it deepened quickly, like a current pulling them under. She told him about growing up with a single mom, scraping by, clawing her way through college on scholarships and stubborn will. He listened, his attention unwavering, his questions cutting straight to the heart of her. "And you?" she asked, swirling her glass, emboldened by the wine and the way he looked at her. "How does someone like you end up—" "Well, you." He leaned back, his expression softening. "Someone like me?" "Don't play coy," she teased. "Billionaire, CEO, the guy who owns half the city." "Not half," he said with a dry laugh. "Maybe a quarter." He paused, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "My father built this company. I was supposed to inherit it, not earn it. But he died when I was 19 and I had to fight for every inch. People think it's all handed to you when your name's on the building. They don't see the blood it takes." She studied him, the weight of his words settling between them. "So you're not just a pretty face with a fat bank account." His laugh was louder this time, genuine. "Careful, you'll ruin my reputation." They ate, plates of delicate food she couldn't pronounce but savored anyway, and the hours slipped by, the city lights growing brighter as the sky darkened. He was different here, away from the steel and glass of Adams Industries. Charming, yes, but intense too, his focus on her like a spotlight she couldn't escape. Every brush of his hand against the table, every lingering glance, stoked the ember that had sparked in the elevator. Dessert came and went, and the conversation slowed, the air thickening with something unspoken. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice dropping low. "You're not what I expected, Scarlett." She tilted her head, her breath catching. "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd shrink, play it safe." His eyes locked on hers, unflinching. "You don't." Her heart thudded, loud enough she swore he could hear it. "Maybe I just hide it well." "No," he said, almost a whisper. "You don't hide anything. That's what makes you dangerous." "Dangerous?" She laughed, but it came out shaky. "I'm an intern. You're the one with the power." "Power's nothing if you don't know what to do with it." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, just a graze, but it sent a jolt through her. "You do." She didn't pull away. Couldn't. The space between them shrank, the world narrowing to the heat of his touch, the storm in his eyes. He stood, offering his hand. "Walk with me." She took it, her pulse racing as he led her to the edge of the rooftop, the city sprawling below like a sea of stars. The wind tugged at her hair, and he turned to her, closer now, the scent of his cologne, woodsy, sharp, mixing with the night air. "I shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough like he was fighting himself. "Not with you." "Then why are you?" she asked, stepping closer, daring him. "Because I can't stay away." His hand slid to her waist, tentative at first, then firm. Tell me to stop, and I will. Her breath hitched, her mind screaming all the reasons this was wrong. CEO, intern, rules, consequences, but her body leaned into him, her lips parting. I don't want you to. The words barely left her before his mouth was on hers, urgent and electric, like a circuit completing. Her hands found his chest, his heartbeat pounding under her palms, and he deepened the kiss, pulling her against him as if he'd been waiting for this since the elevator doors closed. The city faded, the rules dissolved, and all that remained was the fire between them, wild, reckless, alive. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads pressed together. This is a mistake, he murmured, but his grip on her tightened, betraying his words. Then why does it feel right? She whispered, her fingers curling into his shirt. Because it is. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring her, and she melted into it, the tension of the day unraveling in his arms. But even as passion flared, a shadow loomed. They both knew the stakes. Adams Industries had rules, written and unwritten, and this broke them all. A CEO and an intern? It wasn't just forbidden. It was a scandal waiting to ignite. And beyond the rooftop, beyond their bubble, Grayson's resentment simmered, his call from the night before already setting wheels in motion. Someone had seen the car pick her up. Someone was listening. Scarlett pulled back, her eyes searching his. What happens now? Roberts brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle but his voice firm. We figure it out, together. She nodded, but unease coiled in her gut. This wasn't just a kiss, a night, a fling. It was a line crossed, a door flung open, and whatever came next would demand more than either of them was ready to give. The city lights glittered below, beautiful and indifferent, as the first threads of a larger web began to tighten around them. The rooftop kiss lingered in Scarlett's mind like a melody she couldn't shake. The days that followed blurred into stolen moments, late-night texts, a brush of hands in the hallway, a shared look across a crowded meeting room that said more than words ever could. She was falling, hard and fast, and Roberts was right there with her, his guarded edges softening each time they were alone. It was reckless, intoxicating, a secret they guarded fiercely against the world. But secrets, like flames, have a way of burning out of control. A week later, Scarlett strode through the gleaming halls of Adams Industries, a stack of reports in her arms. She'd been summoned to Robert's office. Nothing unusual now, just another excuse to see him. Her lips curved at the thought, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She'd never felt this alive, this seen. Whatever they were building, it was real, or so she believed. The elevator ride up was quick, the doors sliding open to reveal the executive floor. Quiet, pristine, the hum of power in every corner. His office door was ajar, voices drifting out. She slowed, catching his familiar timbre, low and steady. She raised her hand to knock, but froze as his words sliced through the air. Keep her close, Roberts said, his tone clipped, businesslike. She's a good distraction from all the corporate chaos. Grayson's sniffing around, and I need his focus elsewhere. Scarlett's breath stopped. Her arms went slack, the reports nearly slipping. She pressed herself against the wall, her mind racing to make sense of it. A distraction? That's what she was to him? The kisses, the late-night talks, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. Had it all been a game? His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, responded coolly. She's smart, though. Too smart to keep in the dark forever. She doesn't need to know, Roberts said. Not yet. Just make sure she stays busy, happy. Happy. The word twisted in Scarlett's gut like a knife. She stumbled back, the world tilting, her chest tight with a pain she hadn't felt since she was a kid watching her mom cry over unpaid bills. She'd trusted him, let him in, and this was what he'd made of her. She didn't knock, didn't confront him, She turned and walked away, her heels silent on the carpet, her resolve hardening with every step. By the time she reached her desk, her decision was made. She typed a resignation email, short, cold, final, and hit send. Then she grabbed her bag and left, the glass doors of Adams Industries swinging shut behind her like a guillotine. Robert saw the email an hour later, his phone buzzing during a meeting he barely cared about. Effective immediately, I'm resigning from my internship. Thank you for the opportunity. No explanation. No goodbye. He stared at it, confusion knotting his brow. What the hell, he muttered, shoving his chair back. He called her, once, twice, 3 times. Straight to voicemail. Texts went unanswered. She was gone. He stormed to her cubicle, finding it empty, her coffee mug still half full, a pen lying abandoned. Where is she? He demanded, cornering Linda in the hall. Linda shrugged, unfazed. Quit. Didn't say why. Good riddance, if you ask me. She was trouble from day one. Robert's jaw tightened. Trouble. That's what they all thought of her. But she wasn't trouble to him. She was everything. He replayed their last moments. The rooftop. The way she'd smiled at him in the break room yesterday. Tentative but real. What had changed? He racked his brain, but the pieces wouldn't fit. He called Claire into his office, pacing like a caged animal. Find her. Now I need to know where she went. Claire hesitated, her lips pursing. She's not answering, sir. And there's something else. He stopped, turning sharply. What? Grayson's been digging. He's got evidence, financial discrepancies, offshore accounts. He's taking it to the board tomorrow. Robert's blood ran cold. Evidence of what? Embezzlement, Claire said, her voice steady but grim. It's fabricated, but it's good. Someone's trying to frame you. He sank into his chair, the weight of it crashing down. Grayson. The bastard had been waiting for an opening, and now he had one. But Scarlett, her leaving, was that tied to this too? Had she heard something, seen something? He pressed his fingers to his temples, the empire he'd built, trembling beneath him. Get me everything, he said finally. Every file, every call log. I want to know who's behind this. Claire nodded and left, but Roberts barely noticed. His mind was on Scarlett, her absence a void he couldn't fill. He'd meant what he said to Claire, but not the way she'd heard it. Scarlett wasn't just a distraction. She was his anchor, the one thing keeping him grounded in the storm he hadn't seen coming. He'd kept her close to protect her, to shield her from the vipers circling his world. But she'd misunderstood, and now she was gone. Across town, Scarlett sat in a dimly lit diner, a cold coffee in front of her, her eyes red but dry. She'd walked out on everything, her dreams, her future, him. The betrayal cut deeper than she'd expected, a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. She didn't know about the crisis unfolding at Adams Industries, didn't know Grayson's scheme was closing in. All she knew was the echo of Robert's words, the shattering of her trust. Her phone buzzed again, his number. She silenced it, shoving it into her bag. Let him wonder. Let him feel the sting of losing something for once. But as night fell, the city restless around them, the real storm was gathering. Grayson's evidence was a match, and the boardroom was dry tinder. Roberts would fight. Of that there was no doubt, but without Scarlett he was exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't been in years. And Scarlett, alone with her broken heart, had no idea the dangers she'd walked away from, or the ones still chasing her. What would you do if you fell for someone you weren't supposed to? Let me know on the comments. Scarlett pushed the diner coffee aside, the bitter taste lingering like the ache in her chest. She couldn't stay still, couldn't let the hurt fester. By the next morning, she'd applied to every job listing she could find, her pride fueling her forward. Within days, she landed a position at Crestwood Enterprises, a smaller firm, less glamorous than Adams Industries, but a fresh start. She threw herself into it, filing reports, charming clients, anything to drown out the memory of Roberts's voice calling her a distraction. But at night, alone in her apartment, his face haunted her, the storm in his eyes, the way his touch had felt like a promise. She hated herself for missing him. Across the city, Roberts was unraveling a nightmare. The board meeting loomed, Grayson's fabricated evidence a ticking bomb. He pored over financials with Claire, his office a war room of scattered papers and cold coffee. "It's not just Grayson," he said, slamming a file down. "These accounts trace back to Crestwood. They're funding this, trying to bury me." Claire's brow furrowed. "Crestwood? They've been snapping up our contracts. This isn't random. It's a takeover." Roberts nodded, his jaw tight. "Someone's pulling strings. I want names." Days bled into nights, the conspiracy deepening. Crestwood wasn't just a rival. They were a predator, and Roberts was prey. Then a name surfaced in an encrypted email Claire dug up. Daniel Hargrove, Crestwood's CEO. Roberts froze. Hargrove, a man he'd crossed years ago, a grudge festering in the shadows. The pieces clicked, but one didn't fit. Scarlett. She'd vanished, and he couldn't shake the gnawing fear that she'd been caught in this web too. Scarlett adjusted to Crestwood, her new desk a sterile contrast to the chaos she'd left behind. Her boss, Hargrove, was polished and intense, his praise sharp-edged but frequent. "You're a natural," he'd say, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. She pushed aside the unease, focusing on the work, until a late night at the office changed everything. She'd stayed to finish a proposal, the building quiet, when she overheard Hargrove on a call through his cracked office door. "Adams is crumbling," he said, his voice low, triumphant. "The fraud charges stick, and we move in. Keep the girl busy. She's our leverage." Scarlett's blood ran cold. The girl. Her. She backed away, heart pounding, and fled into the night, the city lights blurring through her shock. Leverage. Roberts. It was all connected. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to face him again, but the truth clawed at her. Had she walked into a trap? Meanwhile, Roberts tracked her down. Crestwood's involvement wasn't just corporate sabotage, it was personal, and Scarlett was in the crosshairs. He found her new address through a favor called in, showing up at her door unannounced, rain streaking his coat. She opened it, her eyes widening, then narrowing. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, arms crossed, blocking the entry. He stepped closer, his voice urgent. "You're in danger, Scarlett. Hargrove. He's using you to get to me." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Right. Like I'd believe anything you say. I was just a distraction, remember?" His face tightened, pain flashing across it. "You heard that? God damn it, I didn't mean it like that. I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" She shoved past him, stepping into the hall. "You lied to me, Roberts. I trusted you, and you played me." "I never played you." He grabbed her arm, gentle but firm, turning her to face him. "I kept you close because you're the only thing that makes sense in this mess. Hargrove's framing me, fraud, theft, all of it. And now he's got you working for him. You think that's a coincidence?" She yanked free, her chest heaving. "I think you're desperate. I'm done being your pawn." "Scarlett, listen." His words cut off as a shadow moved at the end of the hall, a figure in black, swift and silent, lunging toward her with a glint of steel. She gasped, stumbling back, but Roberts was faster. He tackled the attacker, slamming him into the wall, the knife clattering to the floor. They grappled, a blur of fists and grunts, until Roberts pinned him, knee on his chest. "Stay down," Roberts growled, then looked up at Scarlett, breathless. "You okay?" She nodded, trembling, her eyes darting between him and the man groaning beneath him. "Who? What the hell is this?" Hargrove's cleanup, Roberts said, standing, hauling the attacker up by his collar. He knows you're onto him now. The man spat, glaring. You're both dead. He'll finish this. Roberts shoved him against the wall again, his voice ice. Tell Hargrove he'll have to try harder. Scarlett's mind spun, fear and fury colliding. She stared at Roberts, rain dripping from his hair, blood on his knuckles from the fight. He'd saved her. Again. But the sting of his words still burned, and trust was a fragile thing. Why should I believe you? She whispered, her voice breaking. After everything? He let the attacker slump, stepping toward her, his eyes raw. Because I'd burn this city down before I let anything happen to you. I messed up, Scarlett. I should have told you everything. About the company, the threats, all of it. But I didn't want you to run. And you did anyway. She swallowed, the weight of his confession crashing into her. The attacker groaned, stirring, and Roberts kicked the knife farther away. We need to move, he said. Hargrove's not done. She hesitated, then nodded, grabbing her bag. I'm not forgiving you, she said, her tone fierce. Not yet. Fair enough. He offered a faint, weary smile. But I'll earn it. They fled into the night, the city a maze of danger and shadows. Hargrove's plot was unraveling, but the stakes were higher now. Scarlett wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was a target. And Roberts, for all his flaws, was the only one she could turn to. Fate had thrown them back together, but survival would demand more than passion. It would demand truth, and a fight neither could win alone. Scarlett and Roberts slipped through the rain-soaked streets, the attacker's threat echoing in their ears. Her heart still raced from the near miss, her mind a storm of doubt and adrenaline. Roberts kept her close, his hand firm on her arm, guiding her into a waiting car. We're not safe yet, he said, his voice low, eyes scanning the shadows. Hargrove's desperate. He'll keep coming. She didn't argue. The cold steel of the knife flashed in her memory, and for now she let him lead. The car sped through the city, tires hissing on wet pavement, until they reached his penthouse, a fortress of glass and steel perched high above the chaos. Inside, the space was vast, modern, all sharp lines and warm wood, the skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Scarlett dropped her bag, her breath uneven, as Roberts locked the door and activated a security panel. The click of bolts, a stark reminder of the danger outside. You're staying here, he said, turning to her, his tone leaving no room for debate. Until we figure this out. She crossed her arms, defiance flaring despite her fear. I don't need a babysitter, Roberts. No, you need a shield. He stepped closer, his eyes dark with something fierce. That guy wasn't playing. Hargrove wants you gone. Because of me. I'm not letting you out of my sight. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't fight it. Not tonight. The weight of the day, of the betrayal, the attack, the truth, pressed down, and exhaustion won. She sank onto the leather couch, staring at the city below, its lights blurred by rain. Roberts poured 2 glasses of scotch, handing her one without a word. She took it, the burn steadying her nerves. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the clink of glass and the occasional update from Claire over the phone. Hargrove's moves, the board's panic, the net tightening. Scarlett watched Robert's pace, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his control fraying. She hated how her eyes lingered on him, how her pulse quickened despite everything. The air crackled, heavy, the space between them shrinking with every step he took toward her. He stopped a foot away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. The city lights cast a soft glow across his features, sharp jawline, shadowed eyes, making him look both dangerous and vulnerable, a contradiction she couldn't unravel. "You should sleep," he said finally, his voice softer now, rough around the edges. "It's been a hell of a day." She took a sip of the scotch, the warmth spreading through her chest. "I can't, not with all this hanging over us." He nodded, setting his glass down, and sat beside her, not too close, but close enough. The couch dipped under his weight, pulling her toward him like gravity. She didn't move away. "I meant what I said," he murmured, staring at the floor. "I'd burn it all down for you." Her breath caught, the words slicing through her defenses. She wanted to lash out, to keep the wall up, but the fight was draining out of her. "Then why didn't you tell me the truth?" she asked, her voice trembling. "About Hargrove, the company, any of it?" He looked up, his gaze locking with hers, raw and unguarded. "Because I was scared. Scared you'd see me for what I am, a guy who's made enemies, who's got blood on his hands. I didn't want you to run." "I did anyway," she said, the admission heavy between them. "Yeah." He exhaled, a bitter edge to it. "And I let you." The silence stretched again, but it wasn't cold now. It was alive, pulsing with everything they hadn't said. She shifted, her knee brushing his, and the contact sparked something electric. His hand moved, hesitant, resting on her thigh. She didn't pull back. "Scarlett," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I don't know how to fix this, but I can't lose you again." Her heart pounded, a wild rhythm she couldn't tame. She set her glass down, her fingers trembling as they brushed his. "I hate that I can't resist you," she whispered, breathless, the confession spilling out like a dam breaking. He leaned in, his forehead touching hers, his breath warm against her lips. "Then don't." The words unraveled her. She closed the gap, kissing him with a hunger she couldn't deny. Fierce, desperate, a collision of need and forgiveness. His hands slid up her back, pulling her against him, and she melted into the solidity of him, the taste of scotch and longing on his tongue. They stumbled toward the bedroom, shedding clothes like armor, each touch igniting skin, each gasp erasing the distance between them. The bed was a tangle of sheets and heat, their bodies finding a rhythm that was both frantic and tender. He moved with purpose, every thrust a claim, every whisper of her name a vow. She arched into him, her nails digging into his shoulders, the world shrinking to this. To him, it was raw, unguarded, life-changing, like they were rewriting the rules of who they could be together. Afterward, they lay tangled, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. The city hummed outside, a distant pulse. But here it was just them, fragile, flawed, and fiercely alive. "I'm not letting you go," he said softly, his fingers tracing circles on her back. She tilted her head up, meeting his eyes, a flicker of trust rebuilding. "Good, because I'm not running anymore." But even in the afterglow, shadows lingered. Hargrove's threat wasn't gone, and the penthouse, for all its security, wasn't impenetrable. They'd found each other again, but the fight was far from over, and the next move would test them in ways neither could foresee. Scarlett woke in Robert's penthouse, the morning light spilling through the windows, painting gold across the sheets where they'd tangled the night before. His arm was slung over her waist, his breath steady against her neck, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt right. Safe, even. They'd spent the night lost in each other, passion sealing the cracks between them, but the world outside hadn't stopped turning. Hargrove's shadow still loomed, a threat they couldn't ignore. She slipped out of bed, his murmured protest fading as she padded to the bathroom, her mind already racing with what came next. Weeks passed in a blur of stolen nights and cautious days. They fortified the penthouse, Claire digging deeper into Crestwood's moves while Roberts prepared for war with Hargrove. Scarlett stood by him, her resolve hardening. She wasn't just fighting for herself now, but for them. Yet something shifted inside her. Fatigue clung to her bones, her stomach churned at odd hours, and a quiet suspicion grew. One morning, alone in her apartment, she stared at two pink lines on a test, her breath catching. Pregnant. She took another, then a third, and the truth solidified. Twins. Her hands trembled, joy and fear colliding. She had to tell Roberts, but how? When? Before she could find the words, chaos struck. She arrived at the penthouse that afternoon, a nervous smile on her lips, only to find the door ajar, police swarming the space. Roberts stood in cuffs, his face a mask of fury and disbelief, as an officer read charges, fraud, embezzlement, crimes Hargrove's frame-up had pinned on him. "This is bullshit," he snapped, his voice cutting through the clamor. "I didn't do this." Scarlett pushed forward, her heart in her throat. "What's happening? Let him go, he's innocent." The lead officer, a stern man with tired eyes, barely glanced at her. "Step back, ma'am. We've got evidence. Bank records, signatures. He's coming with us." "Evidence?" Roberts turned to her, his gaze desperate. "Scarlett, it's a setup. Hargrove or someone. Find Claire, she'll know." He was cut off, hauled toward the elevator, his protests echoing down the hall. Scarlett stood frozen, the test results burning a hole in her bag, her world tilting again. He was gone, and she was alone, pregnant, terrified, and determined to fight. She didn't waste time. She tracked Claire to a discreet coffee shop, slamming a file of notes on the table. "They took him," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "We need to prove he's innocent. Now." Claire nodded, her calm unshaken. "I've got leads. Hargrove's dirty, but this feels bigger. Someone inside Adams Industries is feeding him ammo. We start there." They dug, days bleeding into nights, Scarlett fueled by coffee and a fire she didn't know she had. She pored over records, hacked emails with Claire's help, piecing together a trail that led not to Hargrove alone, but to a name that stopped her cold. Ethan Adams, Robert's cousin. A quiet figure in the company, always in the background, his resentment a slow poison. The evidence mounted, forged documents, secret meetings, a betrayal decades in the making. Ethan had orchestrated it all, using Hargrove as a pawn to topple Roberts and claim the empire for himself. Scarlett marched into the police station with a USB drive, her chin high. "This clears Roberts Adams," she told the detective, her voice steady. "Financial logs, emails, Ethan Adams framed him. Arrest the right man." The detective skimmed the files, his skepticism fading. "If this checks out, he's out by tonight." "It will," she said, unwavering. "Do your job." Hours later, Roberts walked free, the precinct doors swinging open to reveal Scarlett waiting in the dusk, her coat pulled tight against the chill. He stopped, his eyes searching hers, exhaustion etched into his face. "You did this," he said, stepping closer. "You got me out." She nodded, her throat tight. "I wasn't losing you again." He pulled her into his arms, his grip fierce, and for a moment they just held on, the weight of the fight lifting. But she pulled back, her hands shaking as she met his gaze. "There's something else." His brow furrowed. "What?" She took a breath, the words tumbling out. "I'm pregnant, Roberts. Twins." He froze, his eyes widening, a slow grin breaking through the shock. "Twins? You're serious?" "Yeah." She laughed, shaky and real. "Found out a few days ago. I was going to tell you, but then—" He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "Twins. Holy hell, Scarlett." He kissed her, deep and urgent, then pulled back, his voice soft. "You're incredible. You know that?" She smirked, leaning into him. "You're not so bad yourself, but we've got a lot to figure out." "We will," he said, his tone resolute. "Together." They stood there, the city humming around them. Ethan's betrayal a fresh wound but a fading threat. The mastermind was exposed, Hargrove's empire crumbling under the evidence Scarlett had unearthed. Roberts was free, and Scarlett carried their future. 2 lives, a new beginning. But the scars of the fight lingered, and the road ahead was uncharted. They'd won this round, but the game wasn't over. Not yet. Scarlett and Roberts stood together outside the precinct, the night air cool against their skin, his arm around her as the reality of her pregnancy, twins, settled between them. The fight with Ethan had left bruises, but it had forged something unbreakable too. They married quietly a month later, a small ceremony with Claire as witness, and 9 months after that, their twins arrived, Elijah with Roberts's stormy eyes, and Lila inheriting Scarlett's fierce spark. Life shifted into a new rhythm, chaotic and beautiful, the penthouse now a haven of laughter and tiny footsteps. But peace, they'd learn, was a fragile thing. 3 years later, the twins were a whirlwind, Elijah chasing Lila through the living room, their dark curls bouncing, toys scattered like landmines. Scarlett, now a junior executive at Adams Industries, balanced a tablet and a juice cup, while Roberts, still CEO but softer around the edges, wrestled Elijah into a hug. "Slow down, champ," he said, grinning. "You'll crash the empire before I do." Lila climbed onto Scarlett's lap, tugging her hair. "Mama, story." "Later, baby," Scarlett said, kissing her forehead. "Daddy's got a meeting and I've got—" The intercom buzzed, cutting her off. Roberts frowned, crossing to the panel. "Yeah?" "Sir," the doorman's voice crackled. "Your aunt's here, with a lawyer." Scarlett's stomach dropped. Robert's family, his Aunt Margaret and Uncle Paul, Ethan's parents, had kept their distance since the betrayal, their silence a cold war. She exchanged a look with Roberts, his jaw tightening as he buzzed them up. Margaret swept in, her silver hair severe, her lips a thin line of disdain. Paul followed, broad and stern, with a wiry man in a suit, the lawyer, clutching a briefcase. The twins paused, sensing the shift, and Scarlett pulled them close. "What's this about?" Roberts asked, his voice low, controlled. Margaret's eyes flicked to Scarlett, then the twins, her gaze icy. "We're here for the children." Scarlett stiffened, her grip on Elijah and Lila tightening. "Excuse me?" "They're Adam's blood," Margaret said, her tone clipped. "They deserve a proper upbringing, stability, refinement." "Not." She gestured vaguely at Scarlett, the insult clear. Roberts stepped forward, his presence a wall. "Say it, Margaret." "Not what?" The lawyer cleared his throat, stepping in. "Mr. Adams, we've filed for custody. Your wife's background, her lack of pedigree, her reckless involvement in your legal troubles, raises concerns. The children would thrive with Margaret and Paul's resources." "Resources?" Scarlett's laugh was sharp, furious. "You mean money? Because that's all you've got. Cold cash and colder hearts." Paul bristled. "Watch your tongue. You're a liability, Scarlett. Always have been." Robert's fists clenched, but his voice stayed steady, lethal. "No one touches my family. Ever. You think you could waltz in here and take my kids? Over my dead body?" Margaret smirked, unfazed. "We've got evidence. Your instability, the chaos you've dragged this company through. The courts will see reason." "Reason?" Scarlett stood, Lila on her hip, Elijah clinging to her leg. "You're punishing us for Ethan's mess. He tried to destroy Roberts, and now you're finishing the job." Paul's face darkened. "Ethan was misguided, but he was family. You're an outsider, always will be." Roberts moved between them, his eyes blazing. "She's my wife, the mother of my children. You don't get to decide whose family. I do, and you're not it." The lawyer adjusted his glasses, undeterred. "We've got a strong case, Mr. Adams. Your past legal issues, the scandal. It paints a picture. Then I'll paint a better one, Roberts snapped. You want a fight? You'll get it. Every lawyer, every dime I've got, I'll bury you before you lay a finger on my kids. Margaret's composure cracked, her voice rising. You're throwing away our legacy for her. No, Roberts said, his tone final. I'm building one with her. Scarlett stepped beside him, her chin high. You don't scare me, Margaret. I've faced worse than you and won. Try taking them. I dare you. The twins, sensing the tension, clung tighter, Elijah's small hand in Robert's, Lila's arms around Scarlett's neck. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, turning sharply to leave, Paul and the lawyer trailing her. The door slammed, the echo ringing through the penthouse. Roberts exhaled, pulling Scarlett and the twins into a fierce embrace. They won't win, he murmured into her hair. I promise. She nodded, her voice soft but steel-edged. They don't know who they're messing with. He kissed her forehead, then scooped up Elijah, tickling him until he squealed. Nobody messes with the Addams crew, right, buddy? Right, Elijah giggled, Lila joining in, the tension breaking like a wave. But as laughter filled the room, a shadow lingered. Margaret and Paul wouldn't stop. Their wealth, their spite, a storm brewing on the horizon. Scarlett and Roberts had built a family from the ashes of betrayal, but defending it would demand everything they had. The twins were their heart, their fight, and no one, not family, not fate, would tear them apart. The penthouse settled into an uneasy calm after Margaret and Paul's departure, the twins' laughter a fragile shield against the storm brewing outside. Scarlett and Roberts held their ground, a united front, but the threat from his family gnawed at them. Elijah and Lila were their world, 3 years of love and chaos woven into every giggle, every sticky handprint on the walls. Margaret's custody filing hung over them like a blade, but they fought back with lawyers, evidence, and a fierce determination to protect what they'd built. Days turned to weeks. The legal battle a slow grind, until a new shadow emerged, one far deadlier than family drama. Crestwood Enterprises, still licking its wounds from Hargrove's downfall, had regrouped under a new leader. Victoria Langston, a ruthless strategist with a vendetta against Roberts. She'd watched his empire recover, his family thrive, and it fueled her. With Ethan's whispers from prison and Margaret's backing, Victoria launched a final assault, a meticulously planned strike to obliterate Addams Industries, and Roberts with it. False reports of toxic waste dumping surfaced, tied to Addams's subsidiaries, alongside doctored financials suggesting insider trading. The media erupted, headlines screaming scandal, and the stock plummeted overnight. Roberts stood in his office, the city skyline a gray blur through the rain-streaked windows, his phone buzzing with panicked board members. This is a death blow, he said to Claire, his voice tight, hands braced on his desk. They've got forged permits, witness statements. How the hell did they pull this off? Claire scrolled through her tablet, her face grim. It's Langston. She's got Ethan's playbook and Margaret's money. They're hitting every weak spot. Public trust, investor confidence. If we don't counter this fast, the company's gone. Scarlett burst in, her coat dripping, eyes blazing. She'd been at a client meeting when the news broke, racing back through the storm. What's happening? She demanded, dropping her bag. The twins are with my mom. I saw the headlines. Is this Crestwood? Yeah, Roberts said, meeting her gaze, his exhaustion warring with fury. They're trying to finish me, us. She crossed to him, her hand on his arm, steadying him. Then we fight, like we always do. He nodded, but the weight was crushing. This isn't just a fight, Scarlett. It's a war. If they win, we lose everything. The company, the kids, all of it. Then they don't win, she said, her voice fierce. I'm not letting them take you down. Claire looked up, hesitant. There's a whistleblower. Someone inside Crestwood. I've got a meeting lined up, but it's risky. If they trace it back, I'll go, Scarlett cut in, her decision instant. They won't expect me. Robert straightened, his eyes narrowing. Number, it's too dangerous. Langston's unhinged. If she catches you, she won't. Scarlett's tone was steel. I've got this, Roberts. Trust me. He searched her face, torn between fear and faith, then pulled her close, his voice low. You come back to me. Promise always, she whispered, kissing him hard before pulling away. That night, Scarlett met the whistleblower, a jittery young analyst named Mia, in a dimly lit parking garage. Rain drummed on the concrete, masking their words. Mia clutched a USB drive, her hands shaking. This is everything, she said, voice barely audible. Emails, recordings, Langston's orders, Margaret's payments. They framed Adams. It's all here. Scarlett took it, her pulse racing. Why risk this? Why help us? Mia glanced around, paranoid. Because Langston's a monster. She threatened my family when I hesitated. I want her stopped. Scarlett nodded, slipping the drive into her pocket. You're brave, Mia. We'll end this. But as Mia turned to leave, headlights flared. 2 SUVs screeched into the garage, blocking the exits. Men in dark jackets spilled out, guns glinting. Scarlett's stomach dropped. Run, she yelled, shoving Mia toward a stairwell. Bullets pinged off the concrete as they bolted, Scarlett's heart hammering. She ducked behind a pillar, fumbling for her phone, texting Roberts one word. Ambush. Back at the penthouse, Roberts paced, the twins asleep upstairs when his phone buzzed. His blood ran cold. Claire, he barked, grabbing his keys. Scarlett's in trouble. Parking garage, 5th and Main. Call the cops, now. He sped through the city, rain blurring his windshield, fear clawing at him. He reached the garage as sirens wailed in the distance, spotting Scarlett pinned behind a car, trading shouts with Langston's thugs. One lunged at her and she swung a tire iron she'd grabbed, cracking his knee. Roberts barreled in, tackling another, his fists a blur of rage. Get away from her, he roared, slamming the man into the ground. Scarlett spun, breathless, meeting his eyes. You're here. Always, he echoed, pulling her behind cover as police flooded in, guns drawn. The thugs scattered, but not before Langston herself stepped from an SUV, her face a mask of cold fury. You're done, Adams, she called, her voice cutting through the chaos. This ends tonight. Scarlett stood, the USB drive in her hand, defiance blazing. No, it ends for you. She tossed it to a cop rushing past. That's your evidence. Arrest her. Langston's smirk faltered as officers swarmed her, cuffs snapping on. The garage fell quiet, save for the rain and Scarlett's ragged breathing. Roberts pulled her into his arms, his hands trembling. You're insane, he muttered, kissing her forehead. And I love you for it. She laughed, shaky but alive. Had to save your ass again. The next morning, Scarlett leaked the files to every major outlet. Langston's plot, Margaret's complicity, Ethan's strings from behind bars. The truth hit like a tidal wave. Crestwood's stock crashed, and Adams Industries stabilized as the public rallied behind Roberts. Margaret and Paul backed off, their custody case collapsing under the scandal's weight. The villains were defeated, their empire dust. That evening, the penthouse glowed with soft light. Elijah and Lila sprawled on the rug with crayons, oblivious to the war their parents had won. Roberts stood by the window, watching the city recover, when Scarlett joined him, her hand slipping into his. He turned, his eyes soft, a question lingering. We made it, she said, leaning into him. Yeah. He pulled a small box from his pocket, flipping it open. A ring, simple but radiant, catching the light. He sank to one knee, his voice low, steady. Marry me, Scarlett. Again. For real this time. Not just papers, but us. Forever. Her breath caught, tears pricking her eyes. She didn't hesitate. Yes. He slid the ring on, standing to kiss her. Slow, deep, a promise sealed. The twins toddled over, tugging at their legs, and Roberts scooped them up, Scarlett laughing as they became a messy, joyful tangle. The city stretched beyond, vast and forgiving, their family whole against all odds. Langston was gone, the threats silenced, but their story, wild, fierce, unbreakable, was just beginning. The penthouse buzzed with a new energy after Robert's proposal, the twins' excited chatter filling the air as Scarlett and Roberts planned a wedding that would mark their triumph over chaos. The ring on her finger felt like a talisman, a symbol of everything they'd fought for, each other, their family, a future carved from the wreckage of betrayal. Days turned to weeks, the city settling into a quiet hum as Adams Industries rebuilt and their enemies faded into irrelevance. Scarlett, once a nervous intern, now stood beside Roberts as his equal, her strength a cornerstone of their world. The wedding loomed, a beacon of joy after years of storms. The day arrived under a sky streaked with gold, the venue a sprawling rooftop garden overlooking the city where it all began. Flowers bloomed in wild bursts of color, fairy lights twinkling as dusk fell, and the air thrummed with anticipation. Scarlett stood in a flowing white gown, simple yet breathtaking, her caramel skin glowing against the fabric. Roberts waited at the altar, his charcoal suit sharp, his eyes locked on her with a quiet awe that hadn't dimmed since the elevator. The twins stole the show. Lila, a whirlwind of giggles, scattering petals with abandon as the flower girl and Elijah, solemn and proud, clutching the rings with tiny, determined hands. Guests filled the rows, Claire, now a trusted friend, beaming from the front, Scarlett's mom, tears in her eyes, whispering, "You did it, baby." Even a few Adams Industries execs who'd weathered the scandals with them. The officiant's voice carried over the soft music, but it was Roberts and Scarlett who held the moment, their vows a raw, unscripted promise. "I was lost before you," Roberts said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, holding her hands. "That elevator didn't just trap us, it saved me. You saved me, Scarlett. Every day since, I've been yours." Her breath hitched, a tear slipping free as she squeezed his hands. "I walked into that building scared, dreaming of something bigger. You gave me that, and more. You're my fight, my home, my everything. I'd do it all again 1,000 times for you." The crowd sighed, the twins tugging at their legs as Elijah piped up, "Kiss her, Daddy." Laughter rippled through and Roberts grinned, pulling Scarlett close, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like fireworks, electric, eternal, sealing a love that had defied every odd. Lila tossed more petals, Elijah thrust the rings forward, and the officiant barely finished, "I now pronounce you," before cheers erupted. The reception spilled into the night, music pulsing as the twins danced with sticky fingers from cake, Scarlett swaying in Robert's arms under the stars. "Mrs. Adams," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear, "how's it feel?" She smirked, leaning into him. "Pretty damn good, Mr. Adams. From intern to this, I'd say we wrote a hell of a story." "The best," he said, spinning her gently, the city lights a backdrop to their rhythm. "And it's not over." "No," she agreed, her eyes shining. "Forever's just starting." Claire clinked her glass, raising a toast. "To Scarlett and Roberts, a love that started with a jolt and built an empire. May your elevator always rise." Laughter rang out, glasses clinked, and the twins barreled into their parents' legs, a messy, perfect pile of family. Scarlett, once scrambling for coffee and a chance, was now the wife of a billionaire, not just in wealth, but in heart. Roberts, once a man hardened by power, had found his softness in her, in them. The night stretched on, magical and warm, a testament to a love story born in a metal cage, forged through fire, and destined to last forever. If you enjoyed this story, let me know your favorite part. Thank you for watching this incredible story. If this touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Let's continue spreading love and kindness. See you in the next one.